All right, everybody. Hey, welcome back. Today we are going to start looking at Unit 7, which deals primarily with heredity and answers some questions related to how we pass our physical traits on to our offspring and how we can predict what those offspring are going to look like. In Unit 7, Lesson 1, Exploration 1, we are specifically going to look at this idea of chromosomes and meiosis. And we're going to begin talking about how your body creates the types of cells that are capable of reproducing with another organism so that the new organism has exactly the right amount of DNA. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. As we learned in our last unit, DNA is the genetic material for organisms. We learned that DNA codes for specific proteins and contains the information for how those proteins need to be put together. We also looked at how DNA is packaged into smaller structures that we call chromosomes. Now, these chromosomes differ from organism to organism, but within the same species, they all follow a similar size and shape. And so, for example, this picture right here is what we call a karyotype. Now, if you were to take your DNA in its condensed chromosome form and you were to organize it by size and shape, it would look something like this. A karyotype gives us the opportunity to look at your entire genetic code separated according to chromosomes. Now, in humans, you can see that there are what we call 23 pairs of chromosomes. If you actually counted up the individual chromosomes, there'd be 46. But we describe them in pairs because for each of our cells, for each organism, we get one copy of our DNA from our dad and one copy from our mom. Each copy contains 23 different pieces of DNA, and those 23 pieces are comparable to each other. That's why when you look at this picture, most of these sections of DNA are the similar size and similar shape. So let's go down here. The first term that I want you to be familiar with is the term homologous chromosomes. Now, this is what I was just talking about. Homologous chromosomes are where you have two chromosomes, one from your mom, one from your dad, that have the same general size and shape. And the reason why they have the same general size and shape is because they contain information about the same physical traits. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the information is the same. For example, if this is a chromosome that shows, let's just say the yellow band is where the DNA for hair color is. Well, your dad might have brown hair and your mom might have blonde hair. And so although it contains the same type of information, the actual details associated with that section of the chromosome could be very different. And the same is true for the rest of our physical traits. Eye shape, ear shape, eye color, all of the physical traits that we inherit from our parents are found on the same basic location on our chromosomes. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean they contain exactly the same details. It just means that the type of information is going to be the same. And so again, we call this a homologous chromosome or a homologous pair. So going back to this picture, each one of these pairs of chromosomes would represent a homologous pair. Now, one of the ways that I remember this is thinking about it like socks. If you have a sock drawer like mine, then you probably have several different types of socks inside of it. But, and at least this is what I would hope to be the case, there is a pair that corresponds for each sock in your drawer. You don't just have a bunch of single socks. If you do, that would drive me nuts. My socks are bundled up in pairs so that they're easy to find. And that's one way that I like to think about the DNA because it's kind of the same. There's a bunch of different types of chromosomes, but there is a pair for each one according to size and shape, similar to the idea of socks in a sock drawer. All right, let's scroll down a little bit further. Again, whenever you come to one of these organizers, I would highly recommend you do it. Just a reminder, half of your genetic material comes from your mom, half of your genetic material comes from your dad. All right, so let's talk about the two different types of chromosomes that exist in our DNA. First of all, we have what we call autosomes. Autosomes are chromosomes which contain all of the information related to an organism's physical features except those pieces of DNA that are related to the sex of an organism. So in humans, again, if you go back up to this picture, 1 through 22 are what we call autosomes because they are going to give information that is independent of the sex of the organism. Your eye color or your hair color or your ear shape does not depend upon what sex you are, male or female. However, if you look down at this chromosome right here, you can see that it's labeled differently. It's not labeled chromosome 23, even though that's how we would describe this pair. It's labeled instead as an X and a Y. And it's the only pair of chromosomes in this entire set that does not have an identical physical size and shape. Now, we'll talk about why that is the case later on. But your autosomes are those chromosomes which in humans would be 1 through 22 that contain characteristics not directly related to the sex of an organism. Your sex chromosomes, however, are the chromosomes, or in this case is the chromosome that determines those physical characteristics that determine male or female. Okay? Now in humans, if an organism has 2 full copies of the X chromosome or chromosome 23, then that organism we describe as female. They're going to have all of the female physical characteristics. An organism that has 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome, we describe them as male, and their physical characteristics will follow a male structure. Now, again, here's that picture again right here. 1 through 22 are exactly the same in terms of size and shape. So the question is, based on chromosome 23, are we looking at a male karyotype or a female karyotype? The answer is male, because there's 1 copy of the X chromosome and 1 copy of the Y chromosome. If it was a female, we would see 2 relatively of size and shape similar chromosome 23. Okay, so now, as with anything else, there are circumstances where it might not be super clear what types of chromosomes an organism has on the 23rd chromosome. They might have what we call, a genetic disorder where there might be no Y chromosome at all. They just have 1 copy of the X, or maybe they have 3 copies of the X, or maybe they have 2 X and 1 Y. And these are all relatively rare, but they do happen. And in these circumstances, we get some physical characteristics that don't make it super clear whether an organism would fit into that male or female category. But again, those are very rare circumstances. And for the most part, we can distinguish an organism's physical characteristics by their genetic code, which is going to be distinguished by this X and Y combination. All right, let's get into some terminology because in our next unit, we're going to look at meiosis, and it's going to be important that you follow along with the way that we describe the types of cells involved in this process. All right, your body cells contain what we call diploid cells because they contain 2 copies of every chromosome, meaning 1 copy from mom, 1 copy from dad for each of your chromosomes. In these diploid cells, we are not going to be using them to reproduce, okay? So in humans, right, we would have a diploid number of what we say 2n. In other words, n being the number of different types of chromosomes and 2 being the fact that we have 2 copies of each, kind of like socks in a sock drawer, right? When you describe the number of socks that you have, you could say, I have 23 pairs of socks, or you could say, I have 46 socks, and both statements would be correct. 23 pairs, or just saying 46 total. Both of those statements would be correct. And in DNA and in humans, we say the same thing. We say that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, or we say that we have 46 chromosomes. Either way is a correct way to describe the DNA in our cells. And these are for diploid cells. However, as you can see here, the gamete or sex cells that our bodies create are only going to contain half of the full copy of DNA. And the reason for this is that these types of cells, these are our sperm cells or egg cells, these cells are specifically designed to be combined with other gametes, with other sex cells, so that when they merge their chromosomes together, they will create a cell that has 1 full set. And so we call these types of cells haploid because they only have half of the full set of DNA. They would not be able to survive on their own. They would not be able to provide enough information for an organism to live. But when combined with another haploid cell, now we get a new set of DNA. All right. So again, gametes are those sex cells, either the sperm for a male or a female for an egg, that contain half of the set of chromosomes. And again, these are the cells that are used to reproduce, okay, in that process of sexual reproduction. Okay, now tomorrow we're going to look at what meiosis is and how meiosis is different from the process that we learned about a few weeks ago called mitosis.